This is Steve Adams from Los Angeles. I was a graduate from North Hennepin in 1990 from the School of Nursing. And I wanted to talk to you about something that happened a little over 100 years ago, but actually has some pretty good application in the times that we're living in right now. I'm talking about the Endurance mission that was led by Sir Ernest Shackleton. And this was a Antarctic mission that had started out in 1914. So things that we can talk about from the endurance expedition. There are, of course, many, many more things that could come out of it, but things that we could talk about right off the cuff. Leaders got to pick their team. And one of the most important things that you could do as a leader or as a manager is the people that you're going to employ, it's the people you're going to pick to be on your team. Shackleton did a really, really good job of the people that he picked and he assigned on the endurance expedition. A leader needs to recognize and adapt to changes in circumstances. Well, we're dealing with that now in the healthcare setting in a very, very big way. COVID has just been a game changer, particularly in healthcare. Healthcare was a very challenging field anyway prior to COVID. Well, COVID ended up making things a whole lot more challenging for us. And we've had to adapt with how we do things on the job. But also, too, one of the things that has come out that can be applied from the expedition is you've really got to care for your people that are working for you. And for those of you who had never heard of the Endurance, this was going to be an Antarctic expedition led by Sir Ernest Shackleton. And the initial plan was to basically go around Antarctica, do some mapping, and also to have people actually cross from one end of the Antarctic to the other. Well, that was the initial goal. When Shackleton was recruiting his crew, he didn't soft sell it. You can see the attached men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours, complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor recognition in the event of success. So right off the cuff, it was going to take a pretty special group of people that were going to respond to this and also be interviewed by Shackleton. As the expedition went along, the Endurance ended up becoming encased in Antarctic ice. The ice tightened its vice-like grip on the Endurance. It crushed the ship. Ship sunk. Shackleton and his crew had to get off the ship. They had to salvage what they could as far as any type of equipment that would be able to help them to stay alive. So when it started out as an Antarctic expedition, now all of a sudden became a mission of survival. So in the end, the idea is, okay, we've got this change in plans, but we've got to get everybody back to Britain. Some pictures from the ship. In the upper right corner, one of the things that Shackleton did that was really important too, he believed that exercise and sport was really good for morale. When you're a leader, you need to be able to do things to try to raise the morale of your troops, especially when you're going through hard times. And in the last 2 years with COVID, we've been going through really, really hard times in healthcare. So it's important as leaders, you've got to try to come up with some innovative ways to try to help with morale with your staff during a really, really tough time. You have to adapt. So COVID became the new normal, how we've had to change things in the clinical area. So we've all had to adapt in our workplace as far as personal protective equipment, as far as what patients that we're seeing, a whole variety of things in healthcare. We have had to adapt because of this. So as the ice flow shrank, it was evident that Shackleton and his men were not going to be able to stay on that ice flow indefinitely as it headed north and was melting. They had to get off. So the next step that Shackleton and his men did, they all got in lifeboats and they ended up finding the first bit of land that they found, and that was called Elephant Island. Small little island, uninhabited, off the beaten path of any major shipping routes, but it was their first dry land that they had been on in months. Clearly, to Shackleton, this was not going to be a place that they could spend an indefinite amount of time. So he knew they had to leave. What he ended up doing is he took a crew of 6 people, and their goal was to get from Elephant Island to South Georgia, where there was a Norwegian whaling station. And then hopefully from that, they could get help to the rest of the men that were staying behind on Elephant Island. And one of the other things that Shackleton had to do too is he had to pick good people to go with him on the trip to try to get to South Georgia. But he also had to pick a good leader that was on Elephant Island to try to keep morale up and keep the guys going for an undetermined amount of time, because there was no guarantee that they were going to get back. Shackleton and the people on this boat that they called the James Caird, they had to sail 800 miles through really rough South Atlantic waters to get to South Georgia. If they missed South Georgia, there was no land for well over another 1,500 miles. If they had missed South Georgia, they would have been gone. Now, another thing to remember in all this too, while Shackleton is trying to keep morale up and try to keep their men going, there's no satellite communication. People in Britain have no idea what's going on with this crew. They do not have modern fabrics. They're using wool. And when it gets wet, it's really, really hard to dry out. So think about all these guys for months and months. You're just constantly cold and wet. What you're having to eat, you're dependent on getting seal meat, you're depending on getting penguins. That's what you're ending up surviving off of, because they're, after a certain point, the canned rations that were from the boat, they ran out over time. So they had to roll the dice, and using a sextant and using the stars to navigate, they had to get to South Georgia. They got to South Georgia. They had to climb they had to climb mountains, they had to climb glaciers, but they eventually got to the Norwegian whaling station. This map does a pretty good job of showing just the whole saga and the timeline, and gives you a pretty good idea of just what an unhospitable part of the world Shackleton and his men were in during all this. So in the end, they were able to get to South Georgia. They were able to get a ship from Chile to go to Elephant Island. They picked up the crew, and they all made it back to Britain alive. It was one of the most incredible bits of leadership that I've ever heard of. Unfortunately, Shackleton was not really recognized for this, because there was a little thing called World War I that was going on. So people in Britain really didn't appreciate at the time just what an incredible feat this was, because they felt that the really brave people were shedding their blood on the fields of the Western Front in Europe. But at the end of the day, when you're a leader, you may not necessarily get recognized for doing a great job in really, really difficult conditions. Sometimes in the end, our reward as a leader is knowing that you did the right thing for doing the job and doing right by the people that you lead. And I'm so happy to have a chance to share this story with you. There's lots of really great books out there on Shackleton and the Endurance Expedition. I think anybody who is a leader or a manager would do well to read the books about Shackleton and the Endurance. And as bad as things have been during the COVID crisis, on the bright side, most of us are not cold and wet during our job, and most of us aren't having to wait for finding our next meal from the next penguin or seal that swims by. You guys all have a great weekend, and I'm wishing you the very best in 2022.